And welcome back to Math Concepts. In this video, we are going to continue our discussion of valid arguments, and we are going to look at some special forms of arguments that recur over and over again, and we'll show how we can use those special forms to determine whether or not an argument is valid. So this gives us an alternative to writing out the truth tables in certain cases. Let's switch over to the document camera and look at some examples. Okay, so here we have got 4 types of arguments that recur over and over again, and if you see these forms, you can know they are valid forms of reasoning. Okay, we have direct reasoning if your premises are P implies Q, P, and the conclusion is Q. If we think of a concrete example, if it's raining, then the grass gets wet. It's raining, therefore the grass gets wet. Okay, so this is direct reasoning. You have the conditional, you have the premise as one of the antecedents, and then the consequent is your conclusion. Contrapositive reasoning. If P then Q, not Q, therefore not P. Okay, so let's look at that same example. Let's take the premise. If it is raining, then the grass gets wet. The grass is not wet, therefore it is not raining. Valid argument. Okay. Transitive reasoning has 2 implications, so you can kind of chain them together. Okay, so P implies Q, Q implies R, therefore P implies R. So I should put a therefore here. Now this last one actually has 2 different types. It's called disjunctive reasoning. And remember, disjunction is a fancy way to say or. Okay, so you have P or Q, not P, therefore you can conclude Q. Okay, so it might be something like this. You either come to practice or you're off the team. No practice, therefore you're off the team. Okay, and this is a similar setup, just with not Q instead of not P. Right, so there are a couple of ways we can use these standard forms to help us understand whether arguments are valid or not. Okay, so use the standard forms to determine a valid conclusion. So, if they have fun, then they will return. If they return, you will make money. Now let's think about what conclusion we can draw. Let me kind of write this in symbols here. Okay, if they have fun, they will return. So if they have fun, then they return. If they return, you make money. Return implies money, okay? So this is looking like transitive reasoning up here. Okay, and notice we can kind of chain them together. So the conclusion would be, therefore, F implies M. Okay, once again, notice we're chaining them together. We take the antecedent from the first premise and the consequent from the last. All right, so in words, therefore, if they have fun, you will make money. Okay. All right, let's look at this one down here. I will buy a car or I will buy a bike. I did not buy a car. Let's look at what conclusion we can draw. Okay, so the first premise, car or bike. Not car. Therefore, now we see we got disjunctive reasoning here because we have an or. Okay, so it's kind of like this one right here. This or that. Not this, therefore that. This or that. Not this, therefore that. So therefore, I bought a bike. All right, let's look at one more type of problem that these standard forms can help us with. So use standard forms to determine whether the argument is valid. If I go to Florida, then I will not study. I did not go to Florida, therefore I studied. Okay, so let's look at this form here. Florida implies not study in symbols. Not F. And the conclusion is saying, therefore S. Okay, it might seem like one of the forms that we just talked about, but let's look back at those closely. Okay, so it kind of looks like contrapositive reasoning almost, but notice that this is the negation of the second part. Okay, over here we've got the negation of the first part. Okay, so this is not matching up with that form. This is not valid reasoning. Okay, this first premise tells us what happens if you go to Florida. It doesn't say anything about what happens if you don't go to Florida. So we cannot conclude anything about whether or not the person studied from this argument. This is not a valid argument. Okay, if you help solve the crime, then you should be rewarded. You helped solve the crime, therefore you should be rewarded. Okay, let's put this in symbols. C, if you help solve the crime, you should be rewarded. Okay, C implies R. C, therefore R, right? That's the form that this argument has. This is direct reasoning. Okay, look back in the notes and you'll see that form matches the direct reasoning exactly. Okay, so these standard forms of arguments, they provide valuable shortcuts. Now you can only use them when the argument you're dealing with matches one of those standard forms, and then you could say, okay, yes, we've got valid reasoning because it matches the direct reasoning form, or the contrapositive reasoning form, or transitive, or the disjunctive. Okay, so these are handy for determining whether an argument is valid.